What's going on, guys? This is VinylicPuma, back with another Borderlands 3 video for you guys, and today I'll be going over what I think are some of the worst skills across all four of the main Vault Hunters in Borderlands 3. Now before we start, and like a number of my other worst countdown videos, it was actually pretty difficult to pick skills for this list. Unlike Borderlands 2, where there are 6 characters to choose from, we only currently have 4 in Borderlands 3, and on top of that, there haven't really been any major balance changes to the game yet that make certain skills really terrible. That said, I do think there are a number of skills that currently leave something to be desired, and I'm going to be going over some of those. To give you some idea, I've got at least one skill for each character, and much like my video on the best skills for all 4 of the main Vault Hunters, we won't be including alternate action skills or their corresponding augments. So if it's on the side or on top of the actual skill tree in question, it's not going to appear on this list. And of course, and as always, definitely be sure to smash like on this video to help protect these slugs from the assault, and failing that, you could just leave a comment below letting me know what your personal least favorite skills are. It's nice to know some of your favorites, as I, after all, have 7. But enough intro, let's go ahead here and start with the low-hanging fruit, which is going to be Amara's steady hand, or I guess, hands skill. While it's not like this skill doesn't work or anything, I do think it's like pretty much any other skill that boosts these same attributes. Better weapon handling and accuracy isn't necessarily always bad. However, I do think it's fair to point out that putting a band-aid over a huge cut isn't always going to work. To put it more crudely, a piece of fecal matter with sprinkles on it is still fecal matter. And following that logic, trying to make your already inaccurate and poor handling weapons more accurate by speccing into steady hand or hands isn't really going to work all that well. The other thing you have to consider is that both skills to either side of it, whether it be anima or infusion, are simply better. After all, the former improves the effects of your damage over time effects, while the latter adds your active skill element to your shots, which can then be further enhanced through skills like Tempest or Forceful Expression. So there's definitely an opportunity cost here in terms of either of these tier 1 skills, and thus I'd recommend you avoid Steady Hand or Hands. As a general rule, most accuracy-based skills are usually a waste of skill points, and with that in mind, if you find them on a character, they're usually just best avoided. Number 6. Zane's Nerves of Steel. I've got nerves of steel. Or perhaps more accurately, I've got a hot load of garbage. Just like Amara's steady hands, I think you'll rarely, if ever, need to pick up this skill, as it largely boosts the same stats. After all, and to use a different version of the previous analogy, you can't put sugar on stool and expect it to be something other than, well, stool. What I would say makes Zane's Nerves of Steel worse is that it's not truly a passive effect, and that it requires certain conditions to be met so you can receive the bonuses. After all, you have to ensure that your shield is always full, as otherwise you lose all of your stacks. From there, the only way of getting them back is to let your shield fully recharge, and then wait another 15 to 30 seconds or so for all of the stacks to accrue again. Another problem is the insane amount of skill point investment that you actually need to get this skill. Where Amara's Steady Hands appears in Tier 1, Zane's Nerves of Steel appears in Tier 5, requiring something like 20 skill points just to access it. Granted, I suppose it's fair to say that Nerve of Steel's effects are ultimately stronger than what you see on Steady Hands, but is it really worth all of the hassle, just so you can improve your accuracy and handling? In the end, I think you could simply do better with the amount of skill points you would need to get this skill. After all, you could put 1 point into Calm, Cool, Collected, which is an amazing skill, and while Refreshment isn't one of my favorites, I do think it's a better use of your skill points than Nerves of Steel is. So be sure to pick either of those, as those are just way better. Number 5. Flax Dominance. Though I can't deny this is a cool skill, I don't really think it's really as great as it might seem. In many ways, Flax Dominance ability reminds me of Maya's Thoughtlock from Borderlands 2. Funnily enough, both skills are capstones that allow the player to enslave enemies, and fortunately, Dominance doesn't lock and waste your action skill. However, I still find its effect to be of questionable merit. On the one hand, you can use it to enslave anointed enemies, which can really come in handy since these are pretty tough enemies. But on the other hand, you have to figure that this skill is a capstone, meaning you have to allocate a lot of skill points just to get it. If you also consider that the enemy AI is pretty stupid most of the time, I think you'll quickly realize how unreliable this skill can be. It is nice that you could drain enemy health with this particular ability, as 10% can be substantial on tougher enemies. But if you're expecting this skill to do much more than that, you'll probably be pretty disappointed. Ultimately, I think you'll find Flak's other capstones are just better and more useful. In the case of Megavore, it allows you to randomly perform criticals, while Power Inside can boost your damage output by 25 to 50%. While these skills certainly require a more active playstyle to be effective, I think you'll agree the damage potential you can achieve this way is far better than you can achieve with Dominance, and thus, they are just better options. Number 4. Moze's Selfless Vengeance. Feel free to disagree, but I'm not a huge fan of this particular skill. On the one hand, I guess you could say that this skill comes in handy if you're trying to lower your amount of available health. However, I view the lost health as a nuisance, especially in single-player mode, where the player will usually only be able to benefit from that 15% incendiary damage and not be in a position to extend that to their co-op partners. That, and if you consider that you can just spec into Cloud of Lead, get a slightly lower incendiary damage bonus, but in exchange get the ability for your shots to not consume ammo, and I have to wonder what the point of this skill is. I can either hurt myself to get a temporary bonus, or I can spec for another skill in another subtree and get a slightly weaker bonus with no downside. In the best case scenario, where you've reserved pretty much all of your health through the thin red line and converted it into shields, you won't lose any more health upon reloading, but you'll still have to reload to get the bonuses provided. And on top of that, the duration for Selfless Vengeance is still less time than you will see on kill skills, which ends up making it not really worth it in my humble opinion. If you want incendiary damage bonus, I think you're better off just getting it from Cloud of Lead, Stoke the Embers, or even Fire in the Skag Den, as all of these skills will provide incendiary damage bonus without any of the downsides. Number 3. Zane's Good Misfortune. To be honest with you guys, I'm not entirely sure why this skill exists. Maybe Gearbox figured that this would be a good skill for players that didn't want to use the barrier, and some of the higher skills within the undercover subtree like Calm, Cool, and Collected. But at the same time, and at the risk of sounding elitist, you'd be crazy to not use any of those things. After all, the barrier can allow the player to potentially not take any damage, while Calm, Cool, Collected will literally just reset your entire action skill duration upon freezing an enemy. The only limit at that point that you would have is the inability to freeze enemies, as you can even refreeze the same enemy to get your action skill durations reset. With this in mind, why the heck would you want to deal with a skill that not only provides moderate duration increases upon defeating enemies, but on top of that, continues to provide diminishing duration bonuses as you defeat more enemies? Sure, I suppose you could spec for both the Good Misfortune and Calm, Cool, Collected skills, but whenever the action skill durations are reset, all of the action skill duration bonuses you get are also reset. So why go to all of the trouble of trying to defeat enemies in quick succession for a small diminishing duration, when you could just freeze an enemy and reset your entire duration? Again, feel free to put yourself through the pain of defeating enemies and experiencing the diminishing returns. However, I'd rather just go ahead and use a cryo weapon and the Calm, Cool, Collected skill instead. Maybe this is nice for an initial boost or whatever, but beyond that, I think it's a waste of skill points. Number 2. Flak's He Bites. So, I've personally never been a huge fan of damage reflection. The effect itself is usually never really strong enough to deal a ton of damage to enemies, or the effect is usually chance-based, meaning that there's a high probability that the effect won't even do anything. In the case of He Bites, it's more so due to the former issue, as the damage reflected back in enemies is never really high enough to be all that beneficial. With this skill maxed out, you're getting only 15% damage reflected back, meaning if an enemy performs an attack that deals 2,000 damage, only 300 damage is reflected back at the attacker, which is pretty low. Additionally, the He Bite skill itself only works when enemies attack your pet, which limits this particular skill's overall usefulness. It would be one thing if this skill affected both flak and the pet and provided an additional bonus for the pet like Pack Tactics does, but alas, this isn't the case. And for this reason, this is a skill I'd recommend you avoid, especially when you consider that the other skills within Tier 2 of the Master Subtree, which are Who Rescued Who and Frenzy, tend to affect both flak and pet and provide more useful bonuses overall. In the end, I'd recommend you just spec for something else. And for our final entry, number 1, Moze's Daka Bear. Of all of the skills available, I think this one might just be the worst. Interestingly, this skill may actually be pretty decent in the early stages of Borderlands 3, provided you have co-op partners to play with. However, it's not really all that useful for solo players, and seems to get progressively worse as you progress through the game. As far as I could tell, the damage appears to be fixed and also appears to be pretty low. I've seen the turret deal under 500 damage at most, which isn't that great for the base version of True Vault Hunter mode, let alone any of the Mayhem levels where enemies can easily resist non-elemental damage. At the end of the day, I think the skill point used here could just be better used elsewhere. Maybe if the manned turret's damage was impressive, speccing for this skill would be worth it, but as it is, I don't think this skill is really all that useful. If you have the extra skill points, put them in the Security Bear skill, or put them in Redistribution or Rushing Offensive, provided you decide to go far enough in the Bottomless Mags tree. Otherwise, guys, I think that's going to wrap up this particular video. If you enjoyed this video, definitely be sure to smash like, click the bell so you can be notified when I upload my next Borderlands video, and as always, and again, thank you all so much for supporting this channel. Take care, and I'll see you all in the next one.